It began without any warning. They never expected to wake up and find thoughts of you completely filling their mind. That is the first thing you need to understand. Most people simply do not have the strength to confront the emotions they have buried for such a long time. Using every bit of determination to keep those feelings locked away, they convince themselves that they have everything under control. But underneath that calm appearance, something far more powerful has already begun unfolding. The intensity had already taken hold of them, because pretending to remain indifferent works quietly in the beginning. It hides itself so effectively that almost no one notices it at first. Yet the reality was never truly silent. It became an internal struggle they were slowly losing. Even while their eyes remained closed and everything around them seemed peaceful on the surface, you may have sensed that shift yourself. There was a subtle change, a hidden current of energy, as if something meaningful was steadily developing beneath the calm exterior they had worked so hard to maintain. This was never really about distance or uncertainty. It was about something much deeper. It was about the moment when they could no longer ignore what was happening inside themselves. If you truly want to understand how someone secretly struggles with powerful feelings for you, make sure to like this video right now. When emotions first begin appearing, people rarely welcome them. Instead, they resist them with everything they have. They question every feeling from every possible direction. They bury those emotions underneath excuses, pride, and the emotional walls they have carefully constructed over many years. The reason is simple. What they feel for you does not fit the identity they have spent so much time protecting. That is where the real conflict begins. The stronger the emotion challenges their sense of control and pride, the harder they work to push it back down. This process is what psychologists like Freud described as repression. It is the mind's way of pushing away desires that feel unacceptable or too threatening to acknowledge. But repression is never the same thing as making something disappear. Instead, it creates pressure that quietly becomes stronger with time. And pressure eventually finds a way to escape, regardless of how determined someone is to keep it contained. Most people fail to understand this until the feeling becomes impossible to ignore. What they refused to accept yesterday slowly becomes the very force directing their thoughts today. It influences their choices before they even understand what is happening. That is why this morning felt different from every other morning they had experienced before. It was not because something completely new had suddenly appeared. It was because something inside them finally gave way, and you were not there to witness the deeply personal collapse of everything they had been denying. This silent breakdown was never a dramatic confession or an emotional message. It was simply the moment when every strategy they depended upon to escape their feelings stopped working. Comment awakened. If you have ever been the person someone could not stop thinking about the instant they opened their eyes and the morning silence surrounded them, then you understand how powerful that moment can feel. Every familiar distraction disappeared. You did not return as some distant memory. You appeared as a truth they could no longer avoid. Simple attraction can be ignored. Curiosity can disappear with time. But when emotions carry genuine weight, the mind begins losing its ability to continue pretending. They were forced to face a question they had avoided asking themselves for far too long. Why do you affect them this deeply? They searched for answers using logic alone. They convinced themselves it was temporary. They insisted that it meant nothing important. They gave it every explanation they could possibly imagine. Coincidence, chemistry, perfect timing, passing emotions, anything except the truth they feared the most. The reality is much simpler than they wanted to admit. People do not spend endless energy explaining away something that means nothing. They do not struggle against emotions that are not real. They do not repeatedly try to bury feelings that have no depth. Every attempt they made to remove you from their thoughts only caused your presence to become stronger. Every effort to distract themselves collapsed exactly when they needed it most. This was never evidence of weakness. It was evidence of something they could no longer control. They wanted everything to remain according to their own terms. They wanted complete authority over their emotions, their choices, and the direction of their life. Then you appeared and disrupted the careful balance they had spent years creating. You became the one question they could not answer, the one emotion they could not predict, the one presence they could not remove, silence, or overcome, no matter how determined they were to do so. That loss of control became the very thing that frightened them the most. It was never only about you. It was about everything your presence awakened inside them. You did not simply create a passing feeling. You awakened something that had been sleeping within them for years. And people rarely fear emotions themselves. They fear what those emotions might force them to become. That explains why they suddenly pulled away. It explains why their actions became confusing and inconsistent. Their energy felt scattered, not because they cared too little, but because they cared far more than they knew how to handle. Feelings this powerful demand a decision, and they simply were not prepared to make one. Avoidance is not proof that desire is absent. More often, it can be a sign that the desire has become powerful enough to create an internal war. Inside them, two different forces were constantly fighting. Their conscious mind kept telling them to remain safe, stay logical, and protect themselves. Meanwhile, their subconscious refused to cooperate. It continued bringing you back into their thoughts during the quietest moments, especially when every distraction disappeared. Slowly, they realized something they had not expected. You were not fading from their memory with time. Instead, your image was becoming clearer, stronger, and increasingly impossible to overlook. Denial depends on distance to survive. It needs silence. It needs separation. Yet your influence continued growing, even when you were nowhere near them physically. Once an emotion moves beyond uncertainty and settles into subconscious certainty, it no longer waits for permission. It begins demanding attention. That exact moment arrived for them this morning. Quietly, gradually, and without any dramatic announcement. Type-breaking. If you understand what it feels like when someone's denial finally falls apart, without shouting, arguments, or emotional scenes, then you understand how it came like a silent wave that could no longer be resisted. There were no loud words, no dramatic confrontation, and no visible signs for anyone else to notice. Yet inside them, everything had changed. The walls they had spent so much time building no longer felt strong enough to keep the truth locked away. They stood there completely exposed before emotions they had fought so hard to deny. For the first time, they could no longer convince themselves that you were simply another passing thought. They finally understood that what they felt had become something much deeper, something impossible to dismiss, impossible to silence, and impossible to escape. From that moment forward, every new morning would remind them of the truth they had tried so desperately to outrun. Because some feelings never disappear. They simply wait patiently until the heart is finally ready to acknowledge what it has known all along. The walls they built did not collapse because something attacked them from the outside. They gave way beneath the enormous weight of everything they had been hiding within themselves. Even so, it shook them far more deeply than any spoken confession ever could. The truth was never announced for the world to hear. Instead, it settled quietly into a place so deep inside that once recognized, it could never truly be undone. You can deceive other people for a while. Sometimes you can even convince yourself with enough effort. But once the mind genuinely accepts an important truth, it refuses to let go of it without resistance. They now understand the truth completely, no longer through uncertainty or partial understanding. Acceptance does not immediately bring comfort or peace. In many ways, it can create even greater turmoil, because they are now forced to confront everything they had carefully avoided until this point. They must ask themselves what these emotions truly mean for their future. how their life may change because of them, what these feelings require, and above all, what they might lose if they continue pretending those emotions do not exist. Feelings with this kind of intensity never remain still for very long. They continue growing, gathering strength, and moving steadily forward without stopping. Right now, they are standing at the edge of everything that has been building inside them. They are doing everything possible to maintain a sense of control, while the foundation beneath them continues shifting in unexpected ways. This experience was never only about you as a person in their life. It has always been about the deeper parts of themselves that your presence awakened and brought fully into awareness. That inner transformation is still unfolding and has not yet reached its final stage. They once believed that accepting these feelings would make everything quieter and easier to live with as time passed. They were wrong. Admitting the truth this morning did not calm the storm inside them. It simply gave that storm a name. And once it had a name, it became impossible to ignore. When something important is finally named, escaping from it becomes much more difficult. Awareness does not reduce the strength of emotion. Instead, it sharpens every feeling, transforming uncertainty into something solid, undeniable, and impossible to dismiss. That new reality began pressing against them almost immediately. They can no longer pretend that nothing is happening or convince themselves that everything will simply disappear by itself. Every thought now carries greater significance, every memory feels more meaningful, and every quiet moment seems filled with an invisible tension they cannot escape. When the mind loses its ability to deny what it knows is real, it naturally begins dividing into opposing forces. One part of them keeps moving closer toward you, while another part struggles just as strongly to pull away. Neither side is willing to surrender easily. This is not simple confusion. It is a genuine inner conflict between powerful desire and an equally powerful instinct for self-protection. Both forces continue growing stronger because what they feel for you has moved far beyond ordinary attraction. It is slowly becoming a deep emotional attachment that is taking root inside them. Attachment can feel frightening to anyone who fears losing control over their own life and decisions. Most people never notice this hidden process unfolding inside themselves. The stronger their emotions become, the stronger their mental defenses rise in an attempt to protect them from possible pain. That is why, after recognizing what they truly feel, they did not immediately move toward you with certainty. Instead, they paused, questioned themselves, and examined every possibility from every possible angle. They began overthinking situations that once felt effortless because those same moments now carried far greater meaning and much greater risk. Anything that truly matters can begin to feel like a threat to their independence, their identity, and the image they have spent years carefully constructing. You never fear losing something that has no value to your heart. That realization creates a contradiction they can no longer ignore. The very emotion pulling them closer is also the same emotion pushing them away, creating an exhausting tension that never completely disappears. That internal conflict drains them every day and quietly follows them into every part of their routine. It enters ordinary moments that once felt completely normal, because now almost everything carries a quiet reminder of you, even when there is no obvious reason. If you have sensed someone hiding powerful emotions for you, then you already know how a certain tone of voice, a brief hesitation, or even a moment of silence can suddenly bring you back into their thoughts without warning. The subconscious mind holds on much more tightly because it does not follow schedules, plans, or logical timing. You have crossed an important boundary within them, which means you are no longer something optional in their thoughts or emotions. Now they must finally confront the difficult question they have avoided for so long. Why you? Out of every possible person they could have met, why does your presence affect them in such a unique and powerful way? The harder they search for a logical explanation, the less logical everything seems. This connection was never built simply upon convenience or ordinary circumstances that could easily be explained. It cannot be reduced to one reason or a simple story. It comes from something much deeper, something rooted in genuine recognition that feels both unexpected and impossible to escape. If this connection is truly real, then it asks something meaningful from them. It requires action, honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to expose parts of themselves that they have hidden for many years. Because of that, they try to slow everything down. They create distance, hoping it will reduce the intensity of what is already growing stronger inside them. But distance does not necessarily weaken a genuine emotional connection. In many cases, it can strengthen it because it removes the distractions that once kept those feelings buried. When every distraction fades away, only the truth remains. And that truth is becoming louder, clearer, and more difficult to ignore with each passing day. They feel this change every time their thoughts return to you without warning. They notice it in the unexpected emotions that rise during ordinary moments of the day, reminding them that what they feel is no longer something they can simply set aside or forget. They can feel it in the quiet moments when an uneasiness refuses to disappear, no matter how firmly they try to keep every emotion under control. The harder they attempt to bury what is happening inside, the more obvious it becomes that their efforts are no longer working. Every attempt to suppress these emotions leaves them feeling even more unsettled than before. Instead of fading away, the feelings continue returning with greater intensity, making it harder to regain the sense of calm they once depended upon. A genuine inner conflict has now taken hold. They recognize exactly what is taking place within them, yet they continue resisting it day after day. A part of them already understands the truth, while another part keeps looking for reasons to doubt it. They understand how deeply these emotions have impacted them, yet they hesitate to accept everything those feelings are asking of them. That hesitation creates a constant pressure beneath the surface, one that never completely goes away. It quietly grows with each passing day until the strain becomes impossible to overlook. Their struggle is no longer simply about what they feel for you. It is also about what those feelings reveal about who they are. Deep within themselves, they are being confronted by desires they once tried to ignore, a longing to be truly understood, a need to experience a connection that feels genuine, and an unexpected fear of allowing another person to affect them so deeply. Accepting those truths means facing parts of themselves they have carefully guarded for a very long time. Real emotional closeness always comes with vulnerability. Becoming vulnerable means releasing some of their need for control, and that is something they have never considered easy. Because of this, they continue moving between opposite extremes. In one moment, they imagine what might happen if they accepted these emotions, and in the next, they convince themselves that the situation is too complicated, too dangerous, or too uncertain to pursue. This pattern is not happening by accident. It is their mind's attempt to protect itself from a reality that feels too overwhelming to confront all at once. Yet experiences carrying this much emotional weight cannot remain unresolved forever. They may postpone facing them, but they cannot completely escape them. Every decision they delay comes with its own emotional cost. Feelings that are pushed aside never simply disappear. Instead, they transform into tension, restlessness, overthinking, and a continuous stream of mental noise that follows them wherever they go. Recently, that inner noise has become much stronger. It no longer influences only their emotions. It has started affecting the way they think, the decisions they make, the way they respond to ordinary situations, and even how they experience everyday moments. Their concentration disappears more easily than it once did. Their moods change without warning. Small frustrations trigger stronger reactions than they normally would because something much deeper is demanding their attention beneath the surface. An unresolved truth has started rising from within, asking for a level of honesty they are still struggling to provide. It refuses to stay hidden any longer. The more they attempt to silence it, the more persistent it becomes, reminding them that certain emotions cannot be controlled forever. They have become increasingly unpredictable, moving between sudden emotional impulses and careful self-restraint without any obvious pattern that others can easily understand. One part of them wants to move toward you, to end the emotional tension, confront what has been buried, and finally quiet the endless noise repeating inside their mind. Yet another, stronger and deeply conditioned part continues warning them to stay away, protect themselves, and avoid anything that feels emotionally overwhelming. At this stage, this inner conflict is exhausting them because neither side is willing to surrender without resistance, creating a pressure that feels almost impossible to carry. What began as an ordinary emotion has now developed into something much deeper. It has become a question of who they truly are, compared with the version of themselves they continue showing to everyone around them. The part of them that remains distant from you cannot exist forever alongside the part that feels your presence so intensely within. Eventually, one of those versions will have to give way and allow the other to take its place. They are finally recognizing their own repeated pattern of running away more clearly than they ever have before. They now catch themselves searching for distractions whenever they get too close to the truth they have been attempting to avoid. This growing awareness feels deeply uncomfortable because it destroys the illusion that they have always remained in control. They can now clearly recognize every defense mechanism and every excuse they once relied upon. And once someone becomes aware of their own avoidance, pretending that it does not exist becomes almost impossible. That realization creates enormous psychological pressure, making it increasingly difficult to return to the old behaviors that once felt familiar. Even the distance they maintain is beginning to feel artificial. The silence no longer feels like protection. Instead, it feels like a quiet betrayal of themselves. They are running out of places where they can continue hiding these emotions, and they can no longer return to the emotional numbness that once seemed safe. Something fundamental has permanently shifted within them, and that internal transformation is now demanding some kind of final resolution. The human mind cannot continue carrying this level of contradiction indefinitely without eventually making a definite choice. They are standing at that critical edge now, much closer than they would ever openly acknowledge. One more wave of emotional pressure, or one more moment in which their resistance becomes weaker, may push them beyond the point of continuing to hold themselves back. This journey will not necessarily end slowly or peacefully. It is moving toward a decisive breaking point where avoiding reality will no longer remain possible. The mind can survive denial for a certain amount of time, but it cannot remain trapped inside constant contradiction forever without eventually buckling under the strain. Inside, they are beginning to come apart, because the truth now seems to surround them from every direction, leaving almost nowhere left to escape. There is no longer any real refuge in endless reasoning, new distractions, or creating even greater emotional distance. The final stage of this long period of suppression is not endless silence. It is a direct confrontation with everything they have been carrying inside. Whether they believe they are ready or not, that confrontation is steadily drawing closer. Their subconscious is no longer waiting for permission. It is demanding that their outward behavior finally become aligned with what they genuinely feel deep within. The gap between those two realities has simply become too painful to continue ignoring.